The Sports Time Podcast.
All right, I'm pleased to be joined by a returning guest, Nolan Schuman and Myles Fuch of the One for One Pod. How's it going, guys?
Good, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you guys?
Oh, can't complain. Living the dream. Beautiful day out where in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. It's like 28 degrees. I don't know what that is in Freedom, but nice and warm anyway.
Yeah, it's gorgeous here. It's like, because I work off of like a monthly basis, the beginning of the month is always so much better than the end of the month. So right now I'm just cruising on serotonin at the moment.
Let's get into hockey now. It's been a pretty crazy playoffs. You guys wanted to start a playoff preview, so I think we're doing the Caps and Bruins first.
This series was tough because it's from face value, it looks like it should be a really close series because it's a really, really dynamic offensive team like the Washington Capitals going up against another dynamic offensive but also structurally defensive team in the Boston Bruins. And this series was not close whatsoever. Besides the one overtime game, I believe it was an overtime where the Capitals took one of the games. The Bruins just completely outplayed the Capitals. Alex Ovechkin was just not looking like himself. Really, the whole team just didn't look like themselves. One of the biggest storylines going into the playoffs, and actually right out of the trade deadline, was the acquisition of Taylor Hall, a man that I have very close to my heart, and Myles has a little bit close to his heart, but not as much as me. And those, like, insert him on the second line, and the chemistry he had with David Krejci and Craig Smith has just been next level, and has really clicked that whole top six of Boston together. And you combine that with the fact that you've got a number one Norris Trophy level defenseman in Charlie McAvoy. And I mean, the goaltending of Tuukka Rask, it wasn't even close. And then in addition to both goaltending issues and just not being able to keep up with the Boston Bruins, the Capitals also had the issue of a bit of a culture shift in the locker room right now, because at the moment there is a lot of drama regarding their superstar offensive center, or their superstar center, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and his whole absence from the team due to COVID-19 violations and potentially getting it and contracting it and spreading it and then not following along all of the proper protocols. The rumors seem to be in Caps land that he's not very well liked in the locker room. So you combine that with Alex Ovechkin as a pending free agent going into this offseason. He'll most likely be back with the Capitals, but the interesting storyline behind this whole thing is that Alex Ovechkin is not all that far from chasing Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. So he might look at the situation and say, I can finish out my career in Washington and try and go for the record here. Or maybe I take my talents to another team where I can play with a dynamic number one offensive center and maybe break that record a lot faster than I might think. And then the third issue with that too is the Seattle expansion draft that's going to be coming up in July, in which they could be looking at losing a guy like TJ Oshie, who's very well liked in the locker room.
Yeah, so this series ended up being a 4-1 victory, 4-1 for the Boston Bruins. They closed it out. They, like Nolan said, they won. Washington won the first game in overtime, and I had picked Washington in my bracket and made a comment, imagine picking the Bruins, LOL. Imagine sitting at home for the next 4 games and watching Boston come to life like a beautiful flower in spring to win out that series. Tough pill to swallow, but Bruins are moving on. The next series, JJ, was the Colorado Avalanche and your St. Louis Blues. Now, unfortunately, it didn't work out to the Blues' favor. 2 years removed from a Stanley Cup, they look like a completely different team. The Colorado Avalanche and St. Louis Blues went into this series with a nice quote from Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly, where essentially he said, "We're going to have a lot of fun and we're going to beat them." Well, takes that didn't age well. They got swept 4-0. They were also outscored 18-7 on the way to that sweep. One of the big storylines of this series was Nazim Kadri. He came over from the Toronto Maple Leafs a few years ago. He's a repeat offender. Some guys would describe him as a dirty player. Got an 8-game suspension for a hit to the head. Now, for casual hockey fans out there, playoff suspensions are usually not quite that long, even if they are a returning or repeating offender. And Kadri actually took this one to arbitration. He took this right to the top of the league to see if they could get it shortened. Was not. So he is available to come back for Game 7 if there is a Game 7 in the second round series. If the Avs were to lose, he would play out the remainder of that suspension into next season. But surprise, surprise, the Avalanche are really, really good, and I don't think they're going to get swept next round. There's jokes in hockey culture right now that the Avalanche might win all 16 games with no losses and take the cup. They look absolutely phenomenal so far. One of the stories that's coming out of this as well is that there's people saying that the Blues need a significant retool while their core is still young enough to stay competitive in their Central Division and the Western Conference as a whole. So it's going to be an interesting offseason in St. Louis to see how they go about, and it's going to be really fun to watch Colorado keep rolling in these playoffs.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you're someone that's looking to get into hockey and you've never watched a game in your life, if you can watch any team in the league, watch a Colorado game. Colorado is, I said this to Myles actually last night. I firmly believe, and it took me a while to like really break this down and think about it, but like, I think this Colorado team might be the best NHL team I've ever watched in my lifetime. And I've been alive for almost 27 years. So it's the ease of puck movement on their side is unbelievable. It's next level hockey. They're playing chess while everyone's playing checkers. It's unbelievable.
Let's go back to St. Louis there for a sec. Again, you mentioned, of course, they won the Stanley Cup just 2 years ago. What happened to a Blues team that was supposed to be really good the next year? Why has the last 2 years not been exactly the way they are? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Why has St. Louis not been able to take that next level?
That's a really good question. And I think a lot of people in hockey talks have been asking themselves that. I personally think that it really boils down to the Lightning that they were able to capture in a bottle that was their Stanley Cup run. Obviously, everybody kind of knows that up until the halfway point of that season, they were last place. They were looking brutal. The emergence of rookie goaltender, well, he was like 26 at the time, Jordan Binnington came up and played lights out and took them all the way to the final. They just, right place, right time, right group, and really pulled it together for that 19 run. Obviously, the next year with the COVID year, something that was talked about a lot in the bubbles, the way that everything kind of broke down was just how hard the St. Louis Blues locker room was hit by COVID-19 in 2020. So when they came back to return to play, a lot of the players were saying like, man, my lungs feel like I've got nothing there. My legs are so weak. And they came into that play-in, and I think they only won one game before being eliminated in the first round. So a mix of bad luck and, being unhealthy, also losing their star defenseman, Alex Pietrangelo, to free agency at the end of last season has hurt them going forward. But like we'd mentioned, that core is getting a little bit older, and the roster has changed piece by piece to some of those supporting characters that were a huge help. Like even Pat Maroon, great locker room guy, great depth forward, went to Tampa Bay and won a cup last year. So just a few players that have left ship and some sickness that's really kind of taken the wind out of their sails in terms of making them a dynasty.
They also did miss Vladimir Tarasenko for most of this year as well, and that's a massive loss. I mean, you're losing a guy that can pot you 40 goals in a regular season.
Yeah, he's probably one of the best shooters in the NHL, and they didn't have him for a large portion of this year.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, especially for St. Louis. They were supposed to be really good in the next few years, and it was just kind of crazy how the run was, because I remember back in 2019, it was interesting because if you go back to when the Rams left St. Louis to LA, I think it was the owner, Stan Kroenke, said that you can't win a championship in St. Louis, or you can't win a championship in a small town, which is weird because the St. Louis Cardinals, the baseball team, got 11 World Series titles, and it was kind of funny, and it was a little bit bad karma for him because they ended up winning a Stanley Cup before the Rams even win a Super Bowl. So I thought that was really cool. Let's go on to the next series. What series did you guys wanted to talk about?
Next up, we've got the Carolina Hurricanes and the Nashville Predators, a good Southern battle that a lot of people going into the playoffs weren't thinking was going to be much of a series. Nolan and I actually on our show, 1 for 1, predicted that this was going to be, both of us predicted that it was going to be a 4-0 sweep, and it was anything but. The first couple of games, Carolina came out hot, and looked damn good and took both games fairly easily. And then Nashville decided to eat some hot chicken and get things rolling, and took the next 2 games. We also got to see the emergence of the Nashville Predators goaltender Yusi Saros, who has largely been Pekka Rinne's backup. And Pekka Rinne was like a perennial top goalie in the NHL for years. So to see his understudy kind of overtake him in these playoffs and the end of the season here was really interesting for hockey fans. Pekka's getting a little bit older now, though, so it's time to give up the reins. But yeah, he was lights out in this series. Carolina's a young, deep team, but they were showing a little bit of signs of maybe some inexperience in being able to handle the pressure and dropping those 2 games to the Predators. But they ultimately ended up winning that series 4-2. And the Carolina Hurricanes have a really cool culture around them. Their coach, Rod Brind'Amour, is a former Carolina Hurricane himself, former Stanley Cup champion on a number of teams. And there was a little bit of them that went kind of viral where they were in the dressing room after their series victory, and Rod Brind'Amour called his father on the phone, and the whole team sang him happy birthday. So nice feels, nice story. And if that doesn't tug at your heartstrings, I don't know what will.
And the one thing I wanted to mention too about Carolina is they had a pretty major offseason loss this year that not very many people talked about, because it maybe statistically speaking, it wasn't a big deal, but I think in the locker room, it was a huge deal. Justin Williams officially retired this year, the guy that was known as Mr. Game 7, spent years in Carolina as well as with the Los Angeles Kings. But I think that goes a long way too. I mean, we talk about veteran leadership in sports, and I think in hockey, it's still, they put a lot of weight into it still. When you look at like basketball teams or whatever, you do have a little bit of that, but it's not as prominent as it is in hockey. Like you will poll 32 general managers, and most of them will say, "Oh, it's important to have a veteran bottom 6 help in your system." So we like to have that in there. And I think having a guy like Justin Williams on your team who's been there before and is already a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, well, it's nice to have that guy on your side when you're trying to go for Stanley Cups. But unfortunately, he is now retired, and I believe living in the great town of Cobourg, Ontario. So unfortunate to see, but I mean, the Carolina Hurricanes are pretty awesome.
Yeah, they're still, like, not to take any credit away from them, they're still an absolute wagon, and their reward is, spoiler, playing the Tampa Bay Lightning this round. They were actually in the same division as Tampa Bay with the realignment, and in real life, they're in the same or regular life, I guess it is real life. They're in the same division as them. So really cool to see a rivalry in round 2 and 2 damn good teams making for a must-watch series.
All right, so yeah, let's go to the next matchup here.
Okay, Lightning Panthers. I'll do this one.
You go ahead.
All right. This is, I mean, I don't think it's even close to say that. Well, maybe it is close to say, because probably the one we're gonna leave for very, very, very last is actually the funnest series. This was just a treat of a series to watch. High scoring affairs, battle of a couple of goaltenders that have been incredible in their careers, but were not playing up to their standards, and just a couple of high flying offensive teams. The big story behind the Tampa Bay Lightning returning to the playoffs against the Florida Panthers were the arrival of Nikita Kucherov and also Steven Stamkos, their captain. Now, Stamkos did play in the season, but very big controversy. Nikita Kucherov did not play. I believe he ended up having, what was it, Myles? Was it hip surgery or something like that? I think it was hip surgery.
They're saying hip surgery, but there's a lot of people in hockey circles that are saying they were just stashing him so that they wouldn't have to pay any cap penalties.
Yeah. So if you're unfamiliar with how the salary cap works in hockey, it's a hard cap. So comparatively to basketball, where they have a soft cap where you can dip into a luxury tax, hockey doesn't have anything like that. But what they do have is a thing called long-term injured reserve, which means that insurance basically pays for the player to play for your team. And essentially, what they did was they announced right at the beginning of the offseason, so July. Well, the version of July 1st that would have been in October because of COVID, that Nikita Kucherov was going to be going on LTIR and would miss the entire season. So that would mean that his $9.5 million cap hit, which, by the way, he's about the seventh or eighth highest paid player in the league, which means that gets pushed until playoffs. Now, when playoffs happen, there's no salary cap. So you can activate players all you want. So if a team is really deep, like Tampa Bay, they can basically put all these players on LTIR, run their way all the way to the playoffs, and then once playoffs start, they're good to go, and they can have as expensive of a lineup as they want. I think when the number came in, it was like $98 million, and it's an $81 million cap league. So just unbelievably insane. But anyways,
Nolan, how did he do in his first game back? I think there was a lot of rust, and people were saying that he wasn't going to be flying at the speed he usually does. What happened?
He just kind of looked like a bum. He had 3 points after not playing all year long and was just electric the entire time, which included 2 goals. Actually, Myles and I were actually mid-recording, and we were talking about the series. And then I looked up and I said, "Oh yeah," and Nikita Kucherov has 2 goals already. But the other nice story about this too is the Florida Panthers. I mean, they have been essentially perennial losers since they went to the Stanley Cup final in the early 90s, and they've went through all different iterations, the Roberto Luongo era, the Thomas Vokoun era, just the area, like they're a perennial team where they're not selling tickets. They're not featured in multiple advertisements. Their players don't typically win big hardware. But what they do have is a great foundation with Alex Barkov, Jonathan Huberdeau, a guy like Aaron Ekblad, who unfortunately was lost to a leg injury earlier this year. I believe he broke his femur. So awful injury to see happen. But it just meant that there's a bit of a tougher round 1 matchup. Another cool thing about the Panthers, though, is that their rookie goaltender, Spencer Knight, was actually the first 2000s born goaltender to win a playoff game, which is just very cool to see. Now, to combine with that, their supposed to be starter, Sergei Bobrovsky, is in the second year of a 7-year deal that pays him $10 million a year, and he's essentially the 3rd goalie on the depth chart right now. So you don't like to see that. But I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning are what we in the hockey circles call a wagon. They're insane. They're very, very, very good, and they're probably going to be that sort of. We're hoping to see a matchup between them and the Colorado Avalanche in the Stanley Cup final. And yes, in case you're wondering, Tampa Bay Lightning took this one in 6.
Yeah, and I think the Lightning right now, they are what I've been hearing from a lot of people in the hockey world, and even watching them a little bit. They're so dominant, and I feel like again the Lightning have a very good chance to winning the title this year. So let's go to our next matchup: the Knights versus Wild. We'll start with you first. Want to go first, Myles, on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was watching this series pretty closely. Obviously, Nolan and I, the One for One podcast primarily revolves around the Edmonton Oilers, but I'm a closet Vegas fan. They've got a few players on that roster that I absolutely love. And the Wild were a really interesting story this year, led by their phenom 27-year-old rookie, Kirill Kaprizov. So he was drafted in 2015, the same year as Connor McDavid, best player in the NHL. But played a lot of professional hockey in Russia and decided to come over for his first season this year. And wow, did he look good. Not just good, he looked great. And he kind of single-handedly turned the Wild from like a mid-pack team to a third-place finish in their division with a matchup against the second-place Vegas Golden Knights. So we're really excited for this series. Knew it was going to be a little bit of a treat. Can only imagine what the Wild are going to look like if they end up getting a true number one center. And side note, potential Jack Eichel landing spot for all you Buffalo Sabres fans out there. Marc-Andre Fleury is the goaltender for the Vegas Golden Knights, and he absolutely made the Pittsburgh Penguins have nightmares about giving him up in the expansion draft a few years ago. Today, he was nominated for the Vezina Award, which is the best goalie in the NHL. And yeah, he was great this season, won his last 9 consecutive starts. So the Knights were going into the playoffs really, really hot. And this game went the distance. It took all 7 games to wrap up, with the last game in Vegas being the first fully open stadium game in Nevada. So they had a packed house for game 7. It looked electric. The crowd was absolutely buzzing. And yeah, Vegas ended up taking it in a really, really close series that went back and forth, back and forth. So very entertaining first round. And kind of sucks for the Knights that they had to go 7 when Colorado got to rest up really nice with a 4-game sweep against the St. Louis Blues. So those two absolute titans are facing off against each other. So you're definitely sensing a little bit of a theme here where the Vegas Golden Knights and Colorado Avalanche are two absolute powerhouses playing each other to go to the Final Four. And so are the Hurricanes and Lightning out of the other side.
It's actually pretty interesting when you compare the two teams because they're very similar in their own ways. Both have very deep defensive cores. They have talent, they have good to great talent up and down the lineup, but they have very little of at least in the forward groups. They have very little of that elite, top tier talent. So with Vegas, you got a guy like Mark Stone, and then on Minnesota, you got a guy like Kaprizov, and neither of them has a true number one center. Mark Stone typically plays with a guy like Chandler Stevenson, who has been a middle six forward pretty well his entire career. So it's amazing that both of these teams have done it with the formula that everybody knows in hockey, where you need a number one center, number one defenseman, number one goaltender. And also both of these guys are riding goalies that are older guys but have somehow drank from the fountain of youth.
And it's pretty crazy too that when the Golden Knights got the win here, they had a full capacity crowd. That's awesome. I do want to mention before we go into some other playoff series about the Montreal. I know Montreal can't have fans, but do you guys know if they'll be able to have fans at all during the playoffs or not?
We're actually going to talk about that in the preview for the second round because it's going to be really interesting for how it plays out when the winner of the North meets up with the American team. So not to push your question off, but we're going to dive into that pretty deep because there's definitely some discrepancies that need to be addressed from the NHL.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing, especially for how much Canada loves hockey, and yet they can't have fans. And outside Canada, if you go to the U.S., of course, teams are actually having fans now. So that's disappointing. All right, so let's go to our next playoff series. Do you want to start with that as well, Myles?
Sure. I'll do Penguins Islanders, Nolan. Sidney Crosby and his band of merry men have been together for a number of years and have won 3 Stanley Cups together. And the band of merry men in which we are referring to is primarily their top 3, which is Chris Letang, Evgeny Malkin, and Sidney Crosby. They're all getting up there in age. They're all roughly 35, 34 years old. And this was really what a lot of people were thinking, the last kick at the can for them. They've lost out in the first round of the playoffs the past 2 seasons, and they got to face the staunch defensive team of the New York Islanders, coached by Barry Trotz. This was one that a lot of people were thinking was going to go, pretty deep as well. And I believe that the Islanders won it in 6. And the main storyline that came out of it was Pittsburgh, why did you ever let Fleury go? Going back to the expansion draft with Vegas, Pittsburgh was fresh off a Stanley Cup victory where Matthew Murray was an emerging goaltending star. Had some questions around him, but the main thing that the Penguins needed to figure out was if they were going to keep Fleury or if they were going to expose him and ride Matt Murray. Well, we all know how that worked out. They let Fleury go, went to Vegas, took him to a Cup final, Vezina nominee now. He's doing not too bad. Where's Matt Murray? Removed. He is in the wasteland of the Ottawa Senators, who were one of the top 3 worst teams in the league this year. Matt Murray's had a lot of questions around his glove hand, his career, and kind of got exposed. I think he had like 0.85 something save percentage. Got a little bit better as the year went on, but numbers were looking a little bit rough. And Penguins decided to go with their new up-and-comer, Tristan Jarry. Well, JJ, if you weren't watching, you probably don't know, but Tristan Jarry, for lack of a better term, shit the bed and completely lost the Penguins the last 2 games of this series with flubs in overtime for really soft goals. His advanced numbers were terrible. His straight-up numbers were terrible and really didn't even give the Penguins a chance to win. So those 2 key overtime losses on the back of Tristan Jarry, and it's not fair to put a loss on a goalie. As a former goaltender myself, I know how much that hurts, but you also need to be objective when you're analyzing a sporting event, and Tristan Jarry did not give them a chance to win. So sucks for the Penguins that they are now eliminated in the first round for the 3rd consecutive year, but the Islanders are damn good. And that Islanders-Bruins series so far has been really, really entertaining as well. So I think that the better team ultimately won, and we're getting a really exciting second-round matchup.
Yeah, and I think I was listening to Pat McAfee recently, and he's a big Penguins fan himself, and I think he wasn't too happy about what happened, but I feel like, as you mentioned, Pittsburgh's getting up there, and it's sad to say because just a few years ago, they were one of the top teams. Sidney Crosby is one of the best hockey players to ever play. So it's kind of disappointing to see a team like Pittsburgh go down a little bit just because of age and stuff like that. So
yeah, back-to-back cups a few years ago, man. They've definitely had a fall from grace.
Yeah. And it's disappointing to see that because, again, Pittsburgh was fun to watch whenever you'd watch them. I mean, they dominated what they won again 2016, 2017. I think it was the last time they won. So, all right, let's jump on to the Habs versus Leafs. What did you guys think of that matchup?
Well, this is a very, very juicy one, JJ. The Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens are, Nolan, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that they might be the 2 highest probably 2 of the top 5 highest grossing sports brands in North America. Like, their fan bases are absolutely insane. The entire
horrible
and so hard to deal with in Canada because our main sports broadcaster is TSN. Stands for Toronto Sports Network because they like to forget about every other team in Canada and only focus on the Leafs. And all of Bell Media in the province of Quebec loves to simp for the Montreal Canadiens. So the Canadiens and the Leafs are both 2 original 6 teams, have been playing against each other for over a century. The rivalry runs deep. So for the 2 of them to meet in the playoffs is a huge deal, and especially in the first round where the Toronto Maple Leafs were the first place team all year in the Scotiabank North Division, looked like a powerhouse. Nobody was really giving Montreal a shot here. And this series went all the way to 7. Let's recap how we got here. Leafs forever is what they brand themselves as. Leafs forever, a first round loser. They blew a 3-1 lead and lost Game 7 as they always do. Their star players, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, were absolutely invisible this series. Going back a few games, let's say 18 playoff games, Mitchell Marner, who's paid $10.5 million, is without a point. The Leafs have not won a Stanley Cup since the year 1967. And in 32 days, will hold the record in the NHL for the longest Stanley Cup drought. Officially, the New York Rangers are handing that torch over to the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you can't tell how much joy this brings me, I don't know what to tell you. And I think Nolan is on the same page. And it's not that we hate Leafs fans. We know a lot of Leafs fans that are really good people, but it's just the media that surrounds them and talks about them as this holier than thou franchise that can do no wrong. So to see them, with the star power they have, $48 million in their key forwards, all the veteran acquisitions that they made, the first round pick that they gave up for Nick Foligno, they really went all in this year and blew it to an absolutely on fire goaltender, Carey Price, who played fantastic. So before I turn things over to Nolan, I'll just share a few numbers with you. It has been 19,754 days since the Toronto Maple Leafs won a Stanley Cup, 0 days since blowing a 3-1 series lead, 6,251 days since they won a playoff series. The last time they did that was in 2004, which is before the salary cap era of the NHL was instilled. 464 days since they lost to an emergency Zamboni driver who played goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes, and 33 days, well, 32 now, until they set the record for the longest Stanley Cup drought in NHL history. Nolan, how do you feel?
I feel fantastic. When we say Leaf fans, we mainly mean, or when we say that we don't mean all Leaf fans, we mean the ones that are like good guys or the ones that are level-headed, mainly because they're our friends. But this one gets poured out to all the homies that decided that they were going to try and make these arguments that Austin Matthews was even in the same stratosphere as Connor McDavid. Well, you know what? The Oilers may not have done that well this year, but I can tell you what, Connor McDavid was not nearly as invisible as Austin Matthews was. You might as well call him the fucking Hollow Man because you can't see him. Whoa,
John Cena.
Yeah, he's John Cena at this point, man. Just a loaded roster, a team that so many pundits thought was on the same level as a Colorado or a Tampa Bay. Big to you guys. But it's sweetness to my ears is what it is.
And you guys were mentioning that, Toronto has spent so much money every year in free agency and stuff like that. They kind of remind me, and I guess they haven't won in a while either, but the Toronto Maple Leafs kind of remind me a lot of the New York Yankees, where they spend a lot of money, but yet they haven't done anything. Now, the Yankees won a World Series back in 2009, but it seems like that's kind of the direction that the Maple Leafs are considered as. So, I mean, it's crazy to see how Toronto hasn't won since 1967, and Toronto is supposed to be this big hockey town. So, I mean, that's got to hurt for all these Toronto fans. So, all right, let's go to the next round, Jets, Oilers. Who wants to start with that one?
I'll take it. Well, this is the one that we didn't want to talk about, and I don't know why you're making us relive bad memories. But we'll keep it short but sweet. The Oilers were heavily favored going into this matchup. Obviously, as we've said multiple times, we are an Oilers flavored podcast, and unfortunately, in a series where the Oilers were favored to win it in most likely 6, they were swept by the Winnipeg Jets, and essentially the reason being is 3 overtimes in a row. Game 4 took 3 overtimes to finish. And they ran into an extremely hot goaltender in Connor Hellebuyck. Connor Hellebuyck is probably either the best or a top 2 goalie in this league. Series stealing potential. And that's the unfortunate part about hockey is that unfortunately, you can be as stacked as possible, but if you run into a hot goalie, then your series might pretty much well be over.
Toronto.
Yeah, exactly there, Toronto. But like I said, 3 overtimes, it was basically a coin flip, and a lot of the fancy underlying numbers of this entire series were all in Edmonton's favor, but that unfortunately didn't matter when it came down to bounces and chances that all just seemed to go Winnipeg's way. Another cool little factoid. So typically like a number 1 defenseman in a game will play upwards of anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes in the game. And Darnell Nurse, the Oilers' number 1 defenseman, in that game where they played 3 overtimes, played a grand total of 62 minutes, including a 5-minute shift. 5 minutes, which typical D-man shift, Myles, like what, 50 seconds? Minute and a half?
A minute 30, you're screaming. The fact that the fact he was out there for 5 minutes is what? Crazy.
Yeah. But the storyline people want to point to is Connor McDavid, which a guy that I don't put a lot of stock into the into the notion that he's not a playoff performer. It's just he got shut down, and unfortunately the coaching decisions on the Oilers' behalf were not ideal to put Connor McDavid in a position where he could possibly pull off that series. Now going into this offseason, though, this is the offseason that the team has been preparing for since general manager Ken Holland took over the team. This was circled right from the beginning, so it remains to be seen as per what he has planned. A bunch of bad contracts come off the books, and it looks like there's going to be some buyouts. There's going to be some buyouts made, so we could be looking at an offseason where the Oilers turn into one of those upper tier full cup contenders.
And if you want a deeper dive into this series, check out the One for One podcast, episode 21, dropping tomorrow.
All right, definitely check that out. Let's go on to another series, Bruins Islanders. That's going to be interesting. Who do you guys like in that matchup, and what do you think stands out in this particular series?
So this series is the kickoff for the second round. We are moving into the second round showcase here, folks. And this series is actually already 2 games in. It's tied 1-1. Like we've said before, the Bruins are deep. They've got a good goaltender. They've got a good D-core. They've got a great forward group. The Islanders are staunch defensively, really deep in their forwards. One of the best defensive pairings in the NHL in Pulock and who's his partner?
Pelech.
Unreal. Great goaltender in Semyon Varlamov. Myself, I'm liking the Islanders. I'm not liking them in a sexy way, but I'm liking them in 7.
I feel the exact same way. I think the Islanders are just so damn tenacious defensively, and they've got their forwards are pricks to play against. That's the best way to put it. And I just think that they have that synergy over the years too. And
no disrespect to Boston, but the Islanders are probably one of the best. Are not probably. They're the best coach team in the NHL.
Yeah,
the way that they play systems is insane. So it won't be a sexy win, but I think it's going to be an Islanders win.
All right, so let's go to the next matchup. Of course, you got the Avalanche and Golden Knights. That looks like a fun series. Who do you guys like in that one?
I think this is obviously the series of the playoffs. But if Game 1 is any indication, this series might be over already, because the Colorado Avalanche took on the Vegas Golden Knights and absolutely curb stomped them 7-1, including a brilliant performance from Nathan MacKinnon, who's among the best players in the NHL. Like I said, if you're looking for a team to watch and you're looking for some exciting hockey, Avs all the way, man. They're insanely good. I've got Avs in 5.
Yeah, I think Nolan hit the nail on the head. If Vegas decides to show up and plays hard after that defeat that they got in that first game, worth noting that Robin Lehner played instead of Marc-Andre Fleury, which was a decision that had a few people in the hockey world scratching their heads. So we'll see how the rest of the series plays out. But yeah, it definitely looks like it could be Avs in 5. Few names to keep an eye on if you are a passive hockey fan to watch here. Cale Makar, stud defenseman, second or third year in the league. Already a Norris candidate, plays unbelievable. Nathan MacKinnon, as Nolan mentioned, is world-class. Mikko Rantanen can shoot the puck like nobody's business. Captain Gabriel Landeskog looks to have found another gear. Devon Taves is another defenseman on Colorado who's playing out of his mind. He's so solid. And their goaltender, Philip Grubauer, tough to beat as well.
German Prince.
All right, so another matchup, Maple Leafs versus Jets. What do you guys like that?
JJ, that's the Habs and Jets. Poor Leafs fans. They have to take another beating here, just getting dragged through the mud. Habs and Jets, honestly, JJ, nobody likes this one. Nobody wants to see this. Are you familiar with the economic or the mathematical concept of game theory? This is game theory, but every outcome is a loss. No hockey fan wanted to see this second round be Habs Jets, but it's really going to boil down to a goalie battle between Connor Hellebuyck and Carey Price. Both of them are going to have played the first round standing on their heads. Down the middle, the forward group of the Winnipeg Jets, I think, are stronger than the forward group of the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens have the edge on D, and it's really going to come down to goaltending and who's going to be able to get the better of the other. Myself, I like the Jets in 6.
I hate that I'm saying this because I really don't like them, but I think it's Habs in 7.
Hey, I don't think you're crazy for that, man.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Habs is I think if they're going to steal any series, they're going to steal the first two, and it's going to be on the back of Carey Price going back to his like prime Carey Price form, because in his prime, Carey Price was the undisputed best goalie in the NHL and might have been the best player in the NHL at one point. Just a franchise altering goaltender. And in addition to that, you've got a bunch of guys that, similar to the Islanders, are pricks to play against. Josh Anderson, Brendan Gallagher, even a guy like Paul Byron, who scored a beautiful shorthanded goal in the Leaf series. These guys are difference makers, and they might not be the high end top tier talent that you might see out of out of teams like Tampa Bay or Colorado, but they're still really deep. And if you want a guy to watch out for in the series, Cole Caulfield, who is a small, undersized guy, but has probably one of the best shots to enter this league in a very long time.
Yeah, won the Hobie Baker Award coming out of the University of Wisconsin this year. So he made the jump right into the NHL and is looking to be an impact player already.
All right, as we wrap up the second round, Hurricanes, Lightning. I'm assuming you have the Lightning winning, but can the Hurricanes put up a fight on this one?
I think they can definitely put up a fight. How long that fight goes, in my opinion, is 6 games. I think the Tampa Bay Lightning already took game 1 2-1. It was a hell of a game, super entertaining. I think Carolina is going to be able to steal a couple, but not enough to take the series.
Yeah, Tampa's already up 1-0 in game 2, and Carolina has just peppered them with shots on net. So I don't know if I see them taking this, but I actually completely agree with Myles. I think it's going to be Tampa in 6.
And I'm assuming let's see here. I think we already mentioned this a little bit, but do you think there's a good chance that the Lightning could go back to back this year?
It's possible, definitely. Like they have the talent for it. It's so hard to go back to back in this league. The Penguins did it only 5 years ago, and then before that, it was the Red Wings. 15 years before that or something like that. And so it's incredibly rare in hockey. It's very hard to, because especially it's really a game of chance more than anything. I mean, if your goalie decides to have a bad 2 games, then your whole cup plan could be completely screwed. So it's possible. I don't like them as much as I like Colorado, just for the sheer stupendous historic nature of Colorado, but it's definitely possible for sure.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Nolan. Well, no, I don't agree with Nolan. I'm saying Carolina. I'm saying Tampa. Sorry, that was word vomit. I just wanted to touch on it quick because I told you we were going to, and we haven't gotten to talk about it yet. But fans are going to be really, really important in the Final Four. So the way that the kind of reseed of the playoffs works is right now what you're seeing is a playoff for all of the realigned divisions. So the winner of each realigned division gets a ranking based on their regular season record. So the Colorado Avalanche won the President's Trophy. They were the number 1 team in the NHL this year. They will be the 1st seed. Statistically, whoever comes out of Canada will be the 4th seed. So Jets or Habs, eat your heart out. You get to play in Colorado. And this is where it gets really crappy. All the American teams are able to have fans in their stands. The only Canadian team that is able to have fans is Montreal. And even then they're at like a 25% capacity. But that sucks because there's a travel restriction. So as soon as the Canadian team wins, what happens is they move to the city where the American team they're playing is, play all of their games out of their home arena as the home team, even though it'll be packed with Avs fans. So that really sucks. That's a huge obstacle for whichever Canadian team wins to overcome. And I think that it's one that might be insurmountable. And I don't know why the NHL did it the way that they did. I think it was just to keep the season rolling, keep a tight timeline so that they can start next year on time. But if the Oilers, I'll put it to you this way. If the Oilers were going to be that team to win the North Division and I couldn't go to an Oilers playoff game for the conference final, I would absolutely lose my mind. I would be rioting in the streets.
That's got to stink. I mean, we just mentioned it earlier, but Canada loves hockey and yet they can't really have fans. I mean, that's got to stink. And I mean, hopefully it gets better next year, which I think it's going to, but it's got to really stink. And I feel a lot for the Canadian, or just feel for any type of hockey fan in Canada. All right. So at the end of the day, You guys kind of mentioned it, but who do you think will really win the Stanley Cup this year? Do you think you kind of mentioned a little bit with the Lightning, but who do you think will take it all this year?
I'm saying Tampa over the Avs in 7.
Avs over Tampa in 5.
Ooh, spicy.
That would be interesting to watch. I would love to watch it like that game. I mean, the Avalanche and Lightning right now, they look really good, as you guys have mentioned, and I would love to watch that. And of course, I'm just ready to watch any type of playoff hockey. So anyways, before we end the interview, again, this has been great. Thanks for coming on, guys. Can you tell us about your most recent episode? And we can get on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, right?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of currently finishing up right now. It's basically a debriefing on the Oilers season after the Game 4 loss on the Winnipeg Jets. So it's not too depressing as episode 20 was, because that was a tough one to listen to. But 21 is a little bit lighter, and you get a nice little pre and post game Leafs talk. So if you want our immediate reactions to Game 7 of Leafs Habs, it's waiting for you at the end of the episode.
All right. Thanks for coming on, guys. Again, don't forget to check out the One for One podcast. You can check on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Follow them also on Instagram at @1_1forpod. Thanks, guys, for coming on. All my deep regards to you guys. Unfortunately, for you guys falling in the playoffs. Sad for you guys, but hopefully next year is better.
Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot, JJ. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.